Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name's Kay Calendine, and today we're going to be talking about comment analysis and what do you do with those comments once you have collected them. So the primary goal of comment analysis is, to be able to make sense of all of those comments. You have these great open-ended items, questions, and you get them in your consumer's own words, and so they give you a little bit more kind of detail, or they fill in the picture a little bit more, other than just asking the questions. But the challenge with that is, you get your data back, you've got 300 or 400 comments, and they all start running together, and it's really challenging to make sense of that. So with a comment analysis, we're going to kind of be able to quantify those comments so that we can use that as data. And basically we'd be using their descriptive statistics, how often something was said, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. There's three basic steps. There's a lot of work that goes into doing a content analysis, but there's three basic components to it. First, you have to code the comments, and then you analyze the data, and then you're going to develop themes. The themes part is, really rounds it out. Analyzing the data and being able to report descriptive statistics, depending on, what your needs are, may be enough. But if you're really wanting that rounded out picture, then I suggest you also develop those into themes. And of course, we'll talk about that. This is a brief overview, so we'll go kind of quickly, but as it's a recording, you can go back. And then also at the end, we'll talk about contact information if you want more information on comment analysis. Okay, so before you even begin coding comments, the first thing you need to decide is where and how the codes will be recorded. Now, there's all kinds of software programs that will do this for you. You just put the codes in, put the comments in, and then it makes it a lot easier to develop your structure, your code structure, right? It's just as easy, though, I think, to use Excel. And since you probably already have access to Excel, this is probably going to be the easiest way for you to do it as well. So the second thing that you need to do is start making a list of code areas, right? So if you're doing a consumer survey, for example, you know that they're going to say something about the services. They'll probably say something about the staff. They'll say something about how they are now, and of course, depending on what your question items are, you can kind of get a basic idea of what your comment structure is going to look like, right? So the next thing you'll do is you'll kind of start to skim through those comments and build out your code structure, right? So when you start seeing a lot of, one particular topic, you'll know that that needs to be added. I do want to say one of the things that I do that has been very helpful for me is also, as I'm doing the codes, I also am going to create, to be able to flag the different comments, I create a revisit code. That way, if I'm not quite sure how I want to code it, or I think maybe I want to see if more people have said similar things so that it's enough to make its own little section, then I can filter for the revisits and go back and code them later. Just an idea, something that's worked for me. And then you're going to want to create the code structure. So here's an example of two different code structures. The first one, you'll see the primary code is communication. And so in this particular example, you would be looking at more of topic areas. Okay, so then over in the secondary codes, you've got, you start to build on, what's within that communication. So in this particular case, what I have done is I've made a comment code that is just general comments that are positive and general comments that are negative, right? And then, and of course, this is just an example, so it's a very small code structure, but communication with the direct service provider, and communication with staff that isn't the direct service provider. Okay, so these all fall under communication, and there are different aspects of it. And you may find that you need more of those. You may find that you'll need to add like a tertiary code or a third level to your codes. And as you can see, the way that I have it written out, so like with communication, I've got the C at the front and then GP for the positive comments. If you, you know, have a third tier there that you're wanting to do, but you find that you thought there was going to be a lot of comments and there really wasn't, you can go back to the secondary comment, just kind of roll all of those up into reporting on that secondary comment. Okay, so if we go down to the second code structure, you'll see that this is more of, you know, it's separated by, I guess, more concrete as opposed to abstract. So we've got a section for the direct service providers. We've got a section for the staff. We've got, you know, and so within that, we've got positive comment about direct service provider, negative comment again, communication with them. So, you know, we would wrap up, you know, within the direct service providers codes, everything that we want to talk about the direct service provider. Okay, so maybe their availability, you know, that kind of thing. And then the next primary code would be their staff, right? And so you, again, would have the positive and negative and so forth. So that's how you create a code structure. Now, when you get started, just know that this is not going to be the final code structure. Throughout the entire process, this is not static. It's very much flowing as you know, go along. You're going to be adding more codes, and you may even be subtracting codes and recoding things. So you don't, once you have this first code structure, you don't have to feel like you are so tied to it that you are inflexible to add anything else, right? So that's what that looks like. So now we're ready to code. Let me just make sure. Yeah, okay. So that's the examples of the code structure. And then the next thing is to set up your Excel file before you do the comments. So what I have done here, and because of our time constraints, I'm just showing you a screenshot of this, but you'll have your comments down in one column, and then you'll set up codes across. Sometimes people write really long novels and they have a lot to say. I recommend that you keep the number of codes to 4, because after that, it just, you know, there's so few comments that go out. Is it, you know, and of course you're going to have to prioritize the sections of it that are most important, generally, so that I don't interpret the comment for the individual. I just start with, you know, the comment that comes up first, because that's probably the most important to them. That's the one they mentioned first, and just go from there. And then when I hit, you know, a 4th code, you know, I'll see if the rest of it really needs to be added. And you can add more, but you'll find that 4 codes is generally plenty to be able to code out. Because as you'll see in a minute, some comments will have more than 1 code. So what I've also done with my Excel is I have put on a conditional formatting, a filter, so that only certain things can be added. So I've got a list of the codes, and I've made a drop down in each of the cells, so that as I go across, I can only put in what's in this list. And of course, that keeps me from making typos, you know, transposing letters and thinking I have codes that I don't really have, or it not being counted when I, you know, do any kind of analysis on it. So if you're not clear on how to set up that, you can go ahead and ask anybody in RQI, anybody that's at the Transforming Outcomes, and they can help you, you know, figure out how to do that. It's very simple. You just make a list and then you say, look at this list. But if you haven't done it before, we'd be happy to walk you through that. okay? So as I said, comments may have more than one code attached to it. So I've got two sentences that I completely made up, but to kind of give you an idea. So in the first one, there's two different sections, right? So I liked the front office staff, okay? So we would code that as staff positive, right? That's a positive comment. It doesn't necessarily say, I like their communication, so we wouldn't also add that, but if they had said that, we could, right? But if we go on to the rest of the sentence, but I have a hard time getting an appointment with my counselor. Okay, so that has to do with the direct service provider and their availability, and it's also a negative comment about the direct service provider. So we would go ahead and add that negative flag also, just in case we're wanting to look at, how many positive comments were made compared to how many negative comments were made. You're going to end up with obviously more codes than you have comments because of this, because you can add more than one code. Okay, so make sure when you're looking at that you realize when you see the total number, it's not going to match the number of comments you have, and that's the reason. Okay, the next example that I have, a lot of times people will refer back to a question. Oftentimes when you're doing comment analysis, you can't see back to that question. So, we really don't know what they're talking about here, but we do know that they have never been able to get a hold of the office on the first call. So there's communication there with the staff, potentially. There is availability of the staff. Now, in this particular comment, I did not put on a negative or a positive flag, just to show you that, it's really basically what you're looking for. If you're not concerned about having, knowing which ones were positive and which ones were negative, then you don't have to use that. This is, it's quantifying these data, but it's still very subjective. Okay, so we do still need to keep that part in mind, when we get to the analysis part, which we'll talk about next. Basically, the best way to use these data are to make pivot tables, right? I'm not going to go over doing pivot tables because you'll have a whole bunch of that in the Transforming Outcomes Data Crunchers Lab. But I'll just show you basically a couple of examples of what you can do with this. So of course you can do the counts, right? So you can get the frequency numbers for, the count of code 1. Now remember, you have codes 2 and 3 and 4 potentially. So, you'll want to make sure that you incorporate those also if you're just doing frequency numbers. The second thing you could do, and I mean, this is just two examples of what you can do, but the second thing you can do is create a crosstab so you can see, of the times that this particular code came up in code 2, how many times was it related to this code in code 1? So maybe availability and a negative comment code, and you'll see that. Now, one thing to keep in mind also is just that, you have to remember as you're reading these, a lot of people don't leave comments unless they're negative. I mean, when is it that you really want to make your voice heard? So you'll probably come across quite a few negative comments, but you're really going to have to rely on that quantitative data that you have to really get an idea of satisfaction. Because if somebody's satisfied, they may not leave a comment saying, yes, everything was great, or, I liked, etc., unless it's something that is important to them, right? So just keep that in mind. The examples I've been using have been a lot of negative, and that's just because that's my experience. Not necessarily that the organization has a negative side to it. It's just that those are the type of comments that often come up. Once you've coded these, what we're going to talk about now is the thematic analysis. Now, like I said, this is something that I like to do just kind of to round out the full picture, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be done if you're really just looking for frequencies and that type of thing. But basically what I do is I take the codes, and I do this on the computer, but kind of old school with, like the sticky notes, and you move them around or whatever. So in this example, we're looking at an employee survey, right? And so we've got our codes across the top, right? And so I've decided, and again, this is subjective, but my decision has been to group wages, benefits, and time off into a category called compensation, right? Then I've got can talk to supervisor, kept informed. Those were other categories that came up. And I'm grouping those, or those were codes that came up. I'm grouping that into a category of communication, right? And then, we've got the third category is respect, in which I put the recognition. They respect culture. They feel like they're treated fairly. Okay, when you put those all together, so what do all of those have in common that it can tell you about your organization, right? And so um, that's how you get a theme. So in this particular case, maybe the theme is whether or not the organization values their employees, right? And you'll be able to get a sense of that based on what you see in the codes, and then how you organize them in the categories, right? And then see how they kind of all fit together, see how they tell that story, right? Because in the end, even with quantitative data, we're wanting to tell the story. So we can get our qualitative data, kind of get an idea, numbers of what it's saying, what are the individuals, the consumers saying, and then kind of fill out the picture from there. Okay, so I know this has been a really quick overview of comments analysis. If you want more information on how to set up a comments analysis or how to analyze it, please feel free to contact Dee Shen, the Chief Research and Quality Improvement Officer. You may be familiar with him already. And Julia Ramsey, you may also be familiar with her. If you're not, she is our USpeak's accounts manager. Either one of them would be able to, would be more than happy to talk to you about it. Or you can also contact any of us in the RQI USpeak department. So that's all I have for today. I want to thank you for joining me, and have a great day.